Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start by acknowledging this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work and gather on this land. Welcome, everybody. This is unbelievable. I've never seen this room so full, and I am so excited to see so many people from so many different areas of the corporate sector, the public sector, students, professors. So thank you for being here. We are so delighted to have you all here. I would like to start by thanking our sponsor, RBC, and for a couple of reasons. RBC has been an unbelievable supporter of the work that Catalyst does for so many years. They are a sponsor, they are a collaborator, they are a partner, and today they are not only providing us with funding, but they are also providing us with some of their people, which I will come to in a few minutes. So thank you to RBC. We could not do this without you. We are so glad that you are a partner in this today. I'd also like to thank the group of partners that put this on today. I'm fortunate to be standing here, but the reality is that this whole thing came together with a bunch of organizations, most notably the 30% Club and the Canadian Gender and Good Governance Alliance. And for those who are not as familiar with the Alliance, that is composed of the Business Council of Canada, Women in Capital Markets, the ICD, the Canadian Coalition for Good Governance, the Clarkson Centre, the 30% Club Canada, and Catalyst. And these organizations will be represented in a few minutes by Beatrix Dart, and we'll tell you a little bit about the work that we're all doing together. I would also like to thank Rotman for hosting us in this beautiful hall and for making this available to us on the eve of International Women's Day. It's a beautiful place to be, so thank you very much. Now, before we get underway, I just have to do a little plug. So tonight, I ask you all to look up. Wherever you are, look up, because Catalyst is doing something called the Skyline Takeover. So we are with 34 different buildings, 30 companies, 10 cities, 5 countries. We will be illuminating iconic buildings in these locations. They will either be fully red or they will have the women's Venus symbol illuminated. And we are doing that to again advance the conversation around gender equality. Last year, thanks to State Street, we had the Fearless Girl, where she was standing up against to advance to promote women and girls. This year we have businesses actually standing together to promote workplaces that work for women. So please look up tonight. Tweet things out on social media as you see them, because it's going to be great. And also, if you happen to be at Dundas Square is going to be fully lit up for the Skyline Takeover. Okay. Yeah. We're looking forward to it. So to get us underway, we are very fortunate today to have as our moderator John Stackhouse. Now, many of us know John as Senior Vice President and Office of the CEO at RBC, where he's responsible for interpreting domestic and global trends around economies and societies on behalf of the bank and its clients. But many more of us know John as the former Editor-in-Chief of the Globe and Mail, editor of Report on Business, and a very accomplished foreign correspondent. John has been a tremendous collaborator with Catalyst and with many others on the issue of gender parity in this country. I am proud to call him my friend, and he's truly one of the most curious and incisive people that I know. So I'd like to invite John to come up.
Thank you.
And I will explain what's going on.
Okay.
So this morning, thanks to John, we've got a great lineup for all of you, and it's based on the theme of the International Women's Day 2018 theme of Press for Progress. But we are Canadianizing this a little bit today, specifically to discuss an integrated Canadian solution. So John is actually going to lead us through 3 conversations, fireside chats, but I actually like to call them hot seats. First, we are going to hear from the investor community, and specifically we're going to hear from Lindsay Patrick of RBC and Satish Rai of OMERS. And we're going to talk about how institutional investors are stepping up to drive meaningful change on gender diversity across Canada's boardrooms and in the executive suites. Next, we are going to hear from Professor Beatrix Dart, who's going to discuss the Canadian Gender and Good Governance Alliance, which is an unprecedented partnership of not-for-profit organizations who are focused on both gender and governance across Canada. And then last, but certainly not least, we are going to hear how gender balance is impacting Canadian operating companies with David Pathay, the CEO of Sherritt International.
Great, thank you, Tanya. I hope the sound is okay there for everyone. Tanya, congratulations on this event. This is fantastic. So well done to you and your team. We're the warm-up band, if you haven't noticed. And this is an awesome warm-up band, let me tell you. We've had some great conversations leading up to this. I think we all know the challenge. Some impressive progress in Canada. Close to 50% of professionals now in business and finance are female. And we can thank many of the great schools in Canada, including Rotman, for that. But we know the challenges, that especially when you get up to the C-suite level and to the boards, we're still at kind of mid-teens. And I don't think anyone here today thinks that's acceptable. But we've got 4 extraordinary Canadians who are fighting every day to change that. And we're going to hear a bit about what they're doing and what they're up against and what we should all be thinking about as we move on with our days. Let me start first with you, Satish. Satish Rai is Chief Investment Officer for OMERS Capital Markets, but as of April 1, he becomes Chief Investment Officer for all of OMERS. So congratulations, Satish. That's a huge... I want to hear a bit about OMERS' progress on this front, because it's a story probably not enough of us appreciate. You've gone from almost zero, pretty much zero, to 30% in the executive ranks and at the board in a very short time. So maybe you can kick us off with some quick insights as to what OMERS did to make change happen.
Great, thank you. So let me just start off by saying that we can only make change if we actually walk the walk. And so within OMERS, we have a strong philosophy about together we are going to be stronger. And so we think about some of the facts that's gone on. Our board is now approximately 28% women leadership. In the senior ranks in capital markets, we've gone from 0 to 35% in 2.5 years. We've also moved that over the last 2.5 years, 50% of all new hires in capital markets are women. This is in management roles, this is in senior roles, this is with the analyst roles. So within 2.5 years, we've gone to 50-50 hiring. We've moved our women representation across leadership, across the organization in our team to about 33%. So big change very, very quickly. And so the first message I'd say is that people sometimes say change takes a long period of time. And from our point of view, it's in 2.5 years, we've come from a very small start to a very big number, I think. And I think from our point of view, we as an organization are benefiting and our stakeholders are benefiting from that diversity. From our point of view, when we walked in, we didn't set quotas, we didn't do anything. We just said, what's right for the organization, what's right for the pension funds. And we said it'd be a shame if as an organization we didn't tap the widest possible talent pool globally. And 50% of the population in Canada are women, and the leaders and the thinkers, and they have different insights. And so we simply said that when we hire people, we want the broadest representation. And for the senior roles, we actually said that for every final round of interviews, in the final 2 candidates, one has to be a woman and one has to be a man. And so it was a lot of simple things, quite frankly, probably 50 to 100 different small items that all added up. And I can tell you the management across the organization is absolutely behind this. We as an organization are much better suited. The thought process we have, and this isn't just in Toronto. We've started to do this in London, New York, and also now we're going to be in Singapore. So we've started to move the dial across the board, but it's really about having hundreds of small conversations and pushing very aggressively. That's
a great message. It's never one single thing. It's 100 things. You've got to do them all really well. And that's a great organizational perspective. I'm going to draw Lindsay into the conversation for a bit of individual perspective, and then we'll talk about markets. So Lindsay Patrick runs RBC's global ETF strategy, and she's worked in trading rooms across the world. She's a pretty amazing, amazing person. Lindsay, share with us a bit of your own journey, because often we lose these conversations in statistics, and we forget about the individual.
Yeah,
Tell us about your own journey.
Thanks, John. So I had a pretty unconventional career path. After 11 years working on trading floors around the world and the investment banking side of the business as well as the trading side of the business, I took a 6-year career break. And I have 4 young boys, ages 11 to 5. But there was time for me to come back to work. So I rejoined RBC Capital Markets almost 2 years ago after doing the Rotman Back to Work program, which really gave me my confidence back. And quite frankly, brought my ambition back so I could reach out to my former colleagues at RBC and say, I'm ready to come back. And to their credit, they created the RBC Launch Program. It's a new program to bring women back into the workforce that have had a career break. There are other organizations. Women in Capital Markets does a great Return to Bay Street program. And I think the dialogue is changing. We are recognizing that women may take a different career path, but you can still have a very meaningful career. It just may not be a straight line upwards. It may have a few more bumps than men, but there still is a great opportunity for a career in capital markets for women. You can have a family and have a career too.
That's a great story. Now, Lindsay, if you don't know her, is pretty determined, and she came around, I think it was only a couple of months ago, to a whole bunch of people around RBC saying, we're going to launch this ETF, and we're going to do this within 2 months. And I think there were a lot of polite nodding heads saying, sure, 2 months. Good luck with that, Lindsay. So here you are today launching it. Can you explain a bit about the first gender-filtered ETF in Canada that you're launching today? And then we'll get Omer's perspective.
Perfect. So just as a point of clarification, it's my colleagues at RBC Global Asset Management that tomorrow are launching the RBC Vision Women's Leadership MSCI Canada Index ETF. This is the ticker is RLDR, R Leader. So have that on your screens for tomorrow when it starts trading. And this is Canada's first gender lens-focused ETF, focusing solely on Canadian companies. And there was a lot of discussion around why does it need to be Canadian companies. But when I engage with institutional shareholders in Canada, their dialogue and their emphasis on corporate governance really is with Canadian companies. And the mandate of the 30% Club, the first dialogues we have are with Canadian companies. Canada still lags behind other developed countries in the world in terms of where our women on boards are. And I think it's time we had a solution and a positive incentive mechanism to bring Canadian corporates to the table. And that's what we're hoping our leader will do.
And you've initially got, 92 companies?
98 Canadian
98
companies.
Now.
And across all sectors of the Canadian market. So it truly is a broadly diversified Canadian equity fund.
And what's the initial filter that gets them into the fund?
The initial filter is, so MSCI, to my colleagues at MSCI that I know that are here, did all the research and the analysis. So they are the index provider for this ETF. And the initial filter is 3 women on the board, or 30% of women on the board, or 2 women on the board if you have 1 woman in a senior leadership position. But I should note, although that is the criteria as of March 1st, 2018, the criteria is going to change and become considerably more difficult at the end of 2022. We all know nobody likes to be kicked out of an index. So we're going to have to pull up our socks to make sure we comply. And it's going to make just with the single parameter of 30% women on boards plus 1 woman in a C-suite, C-titled executive position.
That's fascinating. Satish, I want to bring it back to you, too, because you're a big backer of this. Maybe you can walk us through your commitment and some of Omer's thinking.
Yeah, so this is a great day for us. I'm going to announce publicly that Omer's is going to be the lead investor for this new ETF. We are committing $100 million as initial round. So we are absolutely thrilled to partner with Royal Bank and now also MSCI. You know, from our point of view, we are focused on absolute returns. And what we find is really critical is that the businesses that have strong diversification that have consistency of returns and higher ROEs, in many cases, those companies have higher portion of women. So what we find that's really exciting about this product is that it actually lines up exactly with the pension promise that we're trying to meet. So from our point of view, we're absolutely thrilled to be part of this. I believe strongly that this will be a very important product. I tell people that I've got a daughter who's 23 years old, and if she has an ETF in her product, she's going to be selling that to buy this product. And I think that, and I'm going to be buying it too. I can tell you that too. But it's, it really is fascinating that instead of just focusing on beating some traditional index or so forth, I think there's a really important message here to find products and investments that are meeting a broader purpose. A proper purpose that also is aligned to your personal liability stream. So I really believe in this case we've got a win-win situation. It's perfectly aligned to the stakeholders of OMERS. It actually sends a very strong message to corporate Canada that if you actually have diversity, you actually will be a better corporation over time too. And then finally, if you want OMERS to be a shareholder, your behavior has to change. So we're actually making three very strong statements.
It's fantastic. Beatrix Dart needs no introduction. She teaches here at Rotman. She's the driver behind so many great efforts in Canada, including the 30% Club. Beatrix, I want to hear about what you're doing with the Alliance. First of all, because you're creating something really powerful there, but also get your perspective on this approach to investing and whether it's really going to work. You look at this from a more critical academics point of view. I'd love your perspective.
Sure. Let me start there. So the motto for International Women's Day, as most of you have probably noticed by now, is Press for Progress. And the first progress I would love to notice is we don't have to make the business case anymore. Thank goodness, it's done. Instead of beating everybody over their head why it's important to have enough women on their board and leadership team, that now is a check mark. The question is more how to do that. And the 30% Club, with the very capable leadership with Victor Dodig as the chair CEO, has done a tremendous job in just putting the right pressure points on. And I call them pressure points because, quite frankly, peer pressure works. If I have a CEO standing there saying to other CEOs why it's important to advance women, the gentleman will listen. If Beatrix Dart is standing there, not so much, right? So pressure works, but also the investor pressure is an important element of that. And I'm absolutely delighted to see that there's more responsible investment opportunities coming up, such as your ETF you're just launching. But also that the investor community says now, you know what, I'm not going to buy your shares unless you show me that you have a proactive gender diversity policy. That is a pressure point that will work very well and hopefully will move the needle forward quite substantially. So from my perspective, this is fantastic news. I think that really will make a difference in the market. And we have made progress. We are now, actually, if you look at the TSX Composite Index, which is our benchmark, we moved from about 12.5% women on boards to nowadays 21%. That was 2017. And we are hoping the momentum is continued to build, right? So there is progress happening. The reason we formed the Alliance is that the Canadian environment has a lot of organizations which are extremely well-meaning, have a lot of passion to advance women. Somebody counted that there are over 400 organizations in Canada alone focusing on gender advancement. Now, if you're a CEO, you probably have quite a few of them knocking on your doors, asking to sponsor events. But the question is, isn't it too fragmented? Isn't it just too many organizations out there and the impact is lost? And so if you are looking at a fragmented market, you put a strategy hat on and you say, wouldn't it make sense to merge or to at least collaborate or to bring them together? And that is what this collaboration is all about. The Alliance is an opportunity for fantastic organizations that are, for now, not-for-profit and Canada-wide, and Tanya mentioned all the 7 organizations, to work together, to collaborate, and to amplify each other's efforts, but because we believe the impact will be that much better if we actually all work jointly together towards the same goal, and that is to advance women.
That's a great message. I don't think we appreciate how small a country Canada is, and we have to work together if we're going to advance the country for everyone's benefit. I want to bring in Dave Pathay from Sherrod, who's got a wonderful story to share. Dave has been president and CEO of Sherrod International since 2012. Sherrod, if you don't know it, is one of Canada's great miners with operations in Cuba and Madagascar. Dave's on a journey, and I'd like to congratulate him for actually being willing to get on stage and talk about the challenges. It's easy for many of us to talk about the numbers and the theory. Dave's board is 2 out of 8 members, I believe, are female. His management team, it's 1 out of 8. So I'll leave it to you, Dave, to walk us through the journey. But thank you for sort of coming on stage and being willing to talk about what the real challenges are for a CEO who's trying to take his organization, especially in the resources sector, through this advancement.
Well, great. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, it has been a bit of a journey for us so far, and there's still quite a long way to go from our perspective. It was just in 2016 that we decided as an organization to make diversity and inclusion a strategic priority. But we're an organization where our workforce is 85% men, and the mining industry's been through a difficult time the last few years, so we didn't have a lot of resources to throw at this. And frankly, we didn't really know where to start or how to get started. I was at an event, though, in late 2016 where I saw Victor speak in the 30% Club. I reached out to Victor. That led to us joining the 30% Club. Subsequent to that, we got into some conversations with Catalyst and ultimately joined Catalyst, and they were a great help to us in terms of giving us resources and helping us find a starting point. Some of the early challenges that we faced were really quite basic, just in terms of even getting good data internally. Like, we knew the composition of our workforce, but we didn't know how many women we were hiring. We didn't know how many women we were losing. There was quite a bit of work to be done just to get better data and understand our problem. We formed a steering committee in the organization from across all of our different operations of people that were interested and motivated to see change on this kind of issue. And we spent quite a lot of time then conducting focus groups to understand local programs, local problems that were impediments or obstacles to advancement of women, and trying to find out why we're seeing the results that we did. That has led to a number of different initiatives now that reviewing HR policies, hiring practices, our work practices, the creation of local steering committees to try and solve local problems in local. But it has been a long process, which is now gaining momentum, but we still have quite a long way to go.
Maybe you can give us a bit more insight into the local action challenge, because we talk a lot about tone from the top, and that's essential, but you also need action from the middle and from the bottom. You've got operations, as I said, in Madagascar and Cuba, and you've got to get action in those places as well as at head office in Toronto. How do you as a leader drive that culture change? Yeah,
trying to strike that balance was something that we wrestled with for quite a long time. The tone from the top and that being repeated over and over again, that this is important, this is where we're going as an organization, this is what we're going to do, has to be part of the message. But we're also conscious that just pure dictums from the head office in Toronto telling how businesses were going to run on the ground in Western Canada or Madagascar or Cuba wasn't going to work either. There were problems and obstacles there that, frankly, we were never going to understand as well as the people on the ground. And one of the things that came out of our focus groups that we conducted in all the different operations was that there were local problems and some appetite to try and address them on a local basis. So we ended up also creating local steering committees at each of the different operations, and that are run by people that sit on our kind of corporate-wide steering committee. And they've been very proactive in identifying issues, and everything from the way we do our job descriptions to the way local hiring practices work to local work practices in those environments. And there are things that are larger intractable problems, but there are easier low-hanging fruit than just in terms of the way we describe jobs and the way we approach filling jobs that we've already been able to make progress on.
That's very interesting. Beatrix, you talk to business leaders across the country, across the world, I'm sure. What do you find are the most significant steps that have led to progress, and what are the barriers that you hear when you're talking to leaders?
Well, everybody likes to have more women in their senior management team and obviously on boards. However, the challenge seems to be to keep that pipeline filled and going. Women don't magically appear at the senior level. So the pipeline issue seems to be still the biggest problem in programs such as Lindsay pointed out, the Back to Work program, helping women to re-enter the corporate world, particularly after taking time off, often for maternity leave reasons or childcare, elderly care, whatever it might be, seem to be still sort of haphazard. They are not enough of those programs out there in the corporate world. I think keeping women engaged and keeping women supported throughout their whole career really will make the biggest difference in terms of getting enough women to the senior management roles. To quote one of Victor's favorite quote, you also need to have targets. What gets measured gets done. And that is certainly the next thing, right? If you don't communicate external measures, if you don't have a particular number and target, and you're willing to put that number out there so you can hold accountable towards that target, very little progress gets done. That certainly has been the experience we have seen.
Satish and Lindsay, maybe you can speak a bit to that. When you're talking to companies that you may invest in and you raise these issues, what do you do when companies say, give us time? Satish, you said time doesn't need to be the barrier that people say it is. Do you demand these targets of them? Do you want them to move faster? And as a fairly significant investor, how do you engage in that conversation?
Yeah, so first of all, going forward, we have started to include gender diversity in our proxy voting guideline policies. So I think adding that automatically asks our portfolio managers to engage in those conversations and ask those tough questions on the proxy voting, things. The second thing, which I think is more important, is that the investments that we're looking for at OMERS is much more stable. And what we're finding is that the businesses that have more women have more higher ROEs. So our message to the CEOs are very simple. We say, if you want us to be a shareholder, we're looking for these kind of characteristics, whether it's environment, whether it's social, whether it's governance, whether it's gender diversity. Those are all the factors that are critical to us as investors. And so if you have to have a lot of things going right for you to even be considered for us. So in this world where index funds and other things are growing so rapidly, I think corporation CEOs really have to do something special to get the attention of big pension plans like ourselves who are trying to move forward. And for those who don't know, our active equity book is very concentrated. We don't buy hundreds of companies around the world. We have a very limited number of companies that we want to target. And so the screening process that we have is very robust. So if you have policies, whether it's ESG or gender diversity, that don't meet our threshold, you just will not be considered. And so you, as a CEO, you want the widest possible net. And I think those are the kind of conversations we have. But I do want to tell people, I think it's a fallacy to say that you need a lot of time to move the dial. And the reason is this. I really believe strongly when people are hiring at the senior level, they're still hiring for the wrong skill set. They're hiring for what they needed, not what they're going to need. And so one of the lenses that we look at is that as you move up the ranks, you need a different set of skill sets. And I think one of the problems that I see with boards and senior management is that when they have the skill matrix, they're actually not expanding the skill matrix to a different kind of lens. And I think one of the ways to accelerate senior women is to change the skill matrix that's required. Different thought process, different leadership. So I think those.
What sort of skills should be added to a matrix?
Well, for instance, you can easily have, you can have a teacher, or you can have somebody that doesn't actually have maybe audit experience, but they provide a completely different set of lens when it comes to society, when it comes to some of the the experiences. So, for us, we've already targeted women with much broader thinking, management skills, global thinking, and not can you run an Excel spreadsheet, and can you do an audit report. And as soon as you start to having those conversations, I think the universe opens up for you very quickly.
I think Beatrix wanted to
jump in on that. I just love that you brought up that point because the Clarkson Center, which is also part of the Alliance, and Matt Fulberg is sitting there, has been promoting for the longest time that the skill matrices really should move beyond just what they call resume markers, right? In the end, if you look at what makes a successful board member, it is usually not whether they check all the resume boxes, but whether they are good consensus builders, whether they can have a respectful debate, etc. So you should actually include attributes like that into your skill matrix that would make a much broader, would open up to a much broader spectrum of potential board candidates than just the resume markers, whether somebody has been, no offense, a CEO of a mining company, for example.
So, Lindsay, I'll come back to you. But, Dave, that was a perfect setup for the miner on stage. How do you think through these challenges as you're making critical board and management decisions?
Well, we have certainly seen that in our own organizations. We went and looked at what are some of the impediments in our own organization. The pipeline is certainly an issue for us. Starting from women going into engineering school, and then those women in engineering schools, not many of them choose mining engineering or metallurgy. A lot of our growing operating roles are in remote locations where people are flying in and flying out, and it's not a conducive lifestyle for a lot of things. But nonetheless, as we went and looked at job descriptions and for more senior leadership roles, we found that in almost every case, the first line item of the job description or the requirements for a senior operating role was 20 years of operating history. And that, by definition, ruled out almost any female candidate. But as we started to unpack that and look behind it, and you look at what the actual job is at more senior levels in the organization, it's not necessarily all about operating history and 20 years of operating experience. You need to know enough about the operations to be able to run them effectively, but it becomes much more about management skills and leadership skills and other intangible factors beyond just pure operating history, where we've probably had too much emphasis in the past just because that was the perception of what the job required.
Lindsay, maybe you can give us a perspective from a global investment point of view and tell us a bit about what you're learning from what other countries are doing. This is the first ETF in Canada, but not the first in the world. How's this going elsewhere, and what insights do you draw from those markets that we might learn from?
Sure. So we've seen a huge rise in investor demand, most recently over the last 3 years. And a recent Bloomberg report estimated that there are over $200 billion of gender lens assets that are being invested right now, both in public markets and in private markets. Almost every major developed country in the world has a gender diversity or a women's leadership ETF of some point. So it's about time Canada got their own for the Canadian perspective. And I think what this is telling us is that investors are demanding more than just a financial return. They want to have some input into the corporate governance of the companies that they're investing in, and perhaps even some of them want to have a social impact in their investment. So the world is changing. Like everything, we're demanding more with less, and I think this rise of gender lens investing is part of that. We're also seeing private or public sector investment funds. So a really interesting case study was Japan last year. The Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan announced in July that they were committing $6 billion into a variety of ESG strategies. And one of them was the MSCI Japan Empowering Women Index. And my colleagues at MSCI tell me that as a result of the Japanese government investing in a women's leadership ETF, they have seen a significant impact in the response rate from Japanese companies. What is the investment methodology? How can I be part of this index? So once you get a lead institutional investor committing a significant amount of capital, it is garnering the attention of the corporate sector, and really I think is a much more effective way for pressing for progress quickly instead of continually voting against companies that maybe don't have those parameters that you would like to see.
Beatrix, is it that simple? Big money talks and...
Money always talks in business. No, money definitely talks. But as I said earlier, I think focusing on where the pressure can be applied makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, we talked about using the 30% Club campaign, having CEO peer pressure on peers, which makes a big difference. The investors are certainly another component of applying now pressure on companies to consider gender diversity. I also want to give a shout out to executive search firms as part of the 30% Club. They also have signed a pledge. If as you can imagine, executive search firms get involved in the search usually for senior roles and board positions for larger companies. And they have come together to sign a pledge saying, you know what, when we put our search slate together, 50% on the long slate will be women. So that is another pressure point that helps. We have now regulators and policy on our side as well. OSCE, I see Maureen Jensen sitting there. OSCE has been working very hard on the Comply or Explain policy, just revisiting how to make that policy with a little bit more teeth, maybe more biting. But we see the momentum building at all those various elements, and I do believe in the end, it will provide us with enough momentum that we actually don't have to go the route of quotas, where many other countries have ended up going.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit more about public action. I think Lindsay wants to.
Sure. And I just wanted to make one point. It would be remiss if I didn't note that Canada has, as of tomorrow, 3 gender lens ETF investments. And so there's a wide range of assortment for investors, depending on what your investor needs are. Evolve has the North American Gender Diversity Index ETF, which comprises Canadian and U.S. companies. Mackenzie announced the Women's Leadership Impact ETF, which is a global fund. So really for investors, there is a wide variety of choice, not just one, and you can really pick whichever one that will suit your portfolio best.
Great addition. But to the point of public action, whether it's quotas or other action, do you think we need to see more conversations and more of a push on that front, or is what the market is doing and demanding and driving perhaps in change sufficient?
As a woman on the stage, I would say women don't necessarily want to see quotas because there is the potential backlash for that to undermine potentially, oh, she's there because they have a 30% quota. So to the extent we can go there with more transparency, more investment, and utilize other pressure points before getting to quotas, I think from my personal perspective, would be much more rewarding for me.
So I've been to conferences in Europe, and I talked to some organizations in France, Luxembourg, Germany, and Switzerland. And France has introduced the quota. And one of the women who's quite senior there, she said to me, "You know what, Beatrix? In the beginning, all the women hated the idea of quota. But now that we have it, it's the best thing ever." My advice, just get over yourself. Just get over yourself. So, that's one way of looking at it.
Satish, do we need to just get over ourselves?
I think these two ladies have actually put it perfectly. I'm not going to add anything to it.
You're not going to go there. Hey, Dave. Would it help you in your journey to have that sort of public pressure, or is investor pressure and your own management team's thinking sufficient?
The easy thing would be to take Satish's out on that, I think, actually. But I would say a couple things. One, I think the pressure is there and growing, and the conversations about what is happening today will help. We're certainly seeing more questions on these types of issues come up to us as we meet with shareholders. The institutional shareholder advisors like ISS and Glass Lewis are paying more attention to these things. But I think most importantly, the conversation needs to be taken to more men, and through these types of conversations, I think that'll happen. As I look at the audience today, I think there are more men in the audience than there were at this event a year ago, but it is still a majority women, and this is an issue that more men need to be engaged in, and particularly coming from my industry where it is heavily dominated by men, men need to be more part of that conversation, and that'll come about in a variety of ways. But to the extent people aren't coming to the conversation needs to be taken to them.
Maybe you can tell us a bit more. I heard some applause there. So, I think we're getting a signal. Okay. Dave, maybe you can tell us a bit more about the thinking that you're seeing evolve in the mining sector. It's interesting. We've got PDAC in Toronto this week. The world's miners are here. We all know it's a challenge, and you articulated the reasons for that very well.
Yeah, I think there's more attention being paid to it, but it is obviously slow, and I think there's a variety of factors. One, people think it's difficult, and there aren't women out there. Adding women to the board is challenging. And the industry's been through a very difficult time, and people have been preoccupied with surviving rather than what they might perceive more as social causes. But ultimately, I think people are coming around to seeing the business case, seeing the moral case, and I think soon they'll see the investor case. And just on the point of actually attracting women, we recently went to last fall to fill a board vacancy, and we were specifically wanted to add a second woman to our board to improve our ratio and consistent with the commitments we had made. For the first time, we actually engaged an international search firm to conduct a proper search. And we have more hair on us from a board perspective than a lot of companies in our businesses in Cuba prevent us from attracting American directors or even potential directors who have a lot of business interests in the U.S. will find us a more difficult board to join than another company, perhaps. But we were really quite blown away by the quality of candidates we were able to attract and find when we tasked a proper international search firm with finding us qualified women directors. We actually had a broad selection, and we were able to add a woman named Maurice Bélanger to our board earlier this year, who's been a fantastic addition already. So there are candidates out there, even in our industry, if you're prepared to go and look for them and you want to make it a priority.
Beatrix.
Can I just add to that? So the Alliance, which has been now mentioned a few times, actually created an output, and I would be amiss actually not to point out here to my co-chair, Ekta Mendy, and her team, who has been working on that output just beautifully. So we created an output which is called the Director's Playbook. And what it is, it's a toolkit, particularly for small, medium enterprises, but also for any company who is thinking about how to increase gender diversity on their board, and that's the focus of the playbook. And so it is helping companies, like as Dave just said, we want to add a woman to the board. How do we go about that? Where do we find her? What should we consider? So the playbook, if you have a chance to download it from the Alliance website, it's free. You can download it, English, French. It's a toolkit. It has 5 tools in it. Use ideally all 5, but at least use 1 or 2 of them if you want to increase gender diversity policy. And it has been a great, as I said, a great collaboration among all these 7 Alliance members. What we are currently working on is something to be more sector-specific, because we do recognize, as Dave pointed out, industry sectors have very specific challenges, and the mining industry sector is different than the technology sector challenges. Or, financial services and professional services sector, they're actually excelling and can help us find the way. So we try to have more sector-specific recommendations as we go along, and that's the next work the Alliance is currently working on.
That's a great point. We've helped launch something called the Board List in Canada, which has come out of the Valley, where it was started by Canadians focused on tech companies. Because you often hear in the tech world there's no women for tech boards. So this group recruits and screens women, and there's, I think, 1,000 now in the database. It's a private list, but just another example of the sort of actions or platforms that are being developed to address that information issue. It's 2018. Information should not be our barrier.
But isn't it bizarre? So I would argue there is a huge supply of women who are ready and willing to serve on boards. I mean, the ICD alone probably has, 2,000 certified women in their registry who went through board designation, whatnot, in all sectors from all kinds of backgrounds. And that's just one list, right? And there are all the other lists, as you just pointed out. So the supply is not the issue. The women are there, the supply is not the issue. And then we hear from companies that they have demand, like they want to find the women. What is lacking, what isn't working so well, seems to be the clearing in the market. There seems to be a misconnect of the clearance factors. So we have the supply, we got the demand. Why is the market not clearing better? And it seems to be a mechanism that hasn't been developed well enough. Of course, there are executive search firms, and they are doing fabulously well. But what we see is that companies still go towards their old networks and their comfortable networks and not looking broadly enough. And I don't know what the magic answer is at this point, next project to work on, but there has to be a better way to create this market clearance because demand and supply is there.
So, Lindsay and Satish, you're both from the trading and capital markets world. Surely that's a solvable problem. How do you think about this clearance challenge that Beatrix has just raised?
That sounds like a business opportunity. I think we'll send it to our innovation lab and get them to crack it.
So as we move towards wrap up, and I'm just getting the tea, so I will take that. The warm-up band always knows its place. So let's thank our extraordinary warm-up band here. Satish, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Great conversation, but thank you for your... I'd just like to thank them all for Dave, Beatrix, Lindsay, and Satish. Thank you all for your leadership on this. It's inspiring. I think you've given us all something to think about as we go away today, and know that none of us are alone in this, and we all have to work together. So thank you for that.